And I'm going to just kind of kick off, as I did with the other two speakers, and ask you, Becky, whether people who have to put care packages in place for elderly parents and relatives, do you think if things are going to get much better when they deal with the local authority and health and social care? If most elderly people want to stay in their homes, do you think this new arrangement will actually improve the experience of people who try to get care packages and sometimes feel like they're banging their heads against a brick wall?
Well, one of the things I think that's really interesting, and certainly all the research that's been done, including by the King's Fund recently, shows is that people don't understand how the social care system works. And I'm hopeful that in the moment of change, in the introduction of the care cap, that actually there will be a real premium on good communication, both nationally and locally. So I hope that we will help to navigate people through the system better. I think it is really challenging because it is a heinously complicated system, and anyone that's attempted to navigate themselves or their friends or family through that will know that. I am concerned because I'm not sure. I think that at the moment the government's kind of commitment has been at a fairly high level. And I don't think, for example, that people necessarily understand that when we talk about a care cap, that it's not all the costs of care that are going to rack up, that you can count for that there's going to be an average price that for care, what the authority says it thinks it should be paid for, which is what will be contributed, which what will kind of go onto your account, not what you actually pay. And probably more significantly, for people who are in residential care, the cap doesn't apply to the hotel costs, it's only to the care costs. So I'm hesitating. I hope it'll be better. I think it's going to be probably more complicated, but I hope, as I say, with that emphasis on communication, which means that we'll be better at navigating people around it. I mean, certainly in East Sussex, Health and Care Connect, which is our integrated portal, as people will know, I think that it works really well there. So it does show, if you're answering all bits of the question and you're able to guide people around, that will be really really useful. But I do think, and it's going to be a theme, I think, for all of us for the next 5 years probably, is going to be this issue about workforce. And so one of the things I'm concerned about is, in order to start your care tariff running, you'll have to have an assessment. We're already struggling, and we're not alone in it, to recruit social workers to do the assessments that they're already doing and providing the services. In East Sussex, I've got the figures to hand, we think that the number of new self-funders who I say we haven't dealt with before is something in the order of 3,000 and 4,000 people. That is a lot of people to assess. And it is going to take, some of the practicalities, I think, may get in the way of having a seamless system as we first start.
Quick follow-up. Do you expect a lot of the care providers are private sector organizations? Do you think that they're just going to go out of business because there's a huge gap between the government's cap and the actual true cost?
I think it puts I think it's hugely variable. I mean, it's interesting in East Sussex, and I don't want to cartoon it too much, but in East Sussex, we've got a much smaller, the providers are much smaller. In West Sussex, we have got lots of small providers, but we've also got much bigger, some of the bigger chains as well. I think the smaller providers are the people that will find this most complicated. But on the other hand, I do think that the working relationships sort of through the pandemic have been they're really strong in East Sussex, and they're much improved in West Sussex, I think. Never want to be complacent about it. So I hope we can work really well with people. But I have to say, I think the autumn and how we respond as a nation, particularly what the government does if there is a further threat of a wave of COVID, will be really significant. I think one of the things I've been keen to talk to the Department of Health about is really to make them understand how fragile the relationships between them and the providers are. And actually recently, the leader of West Sussex organised for Gillian Keegan, who you'll know is the Chichester MP, but also the Social Care Minister, to meet with some of the providers from West Sussex, just so that they could be really open and honest with her and some of the other MPs about the challenges that they face. So I think we just need to keep eyes wide open. The other thing to say in relation to the care cost stuff is there is a particular issue for the southeast counties. We've got a much older population, we've got far more self-funders, and the cost of care in the southeast is much greater. And you put those three things together, and the danger is when the government looks at it, it looks at averages. And actually the kind of the sharpness of the pain down here will get blunted by the very different setups in other parts of the country.
Well, I guess we're kind of treading onto the quicksands that Stephen and I guess Louise are going to have to navigate, because the finances are critical on care. I attended one of these Sussex-wide meetings, and someone just revealed how many people were occupying beds in hospitals and they couldn't be discharged because there was no social care in place to deal with those patients and care users. So let's turn to the audience now. We've got I ignored this poor gentleman before. He works for Health Watch, so he has a right to be here, of course. So ask your question.
Thank you. So my name's Ed Peasgood. I'm the Youth Participation Lead for Health Watch East Sussex. I run our Young Health Watch service, and I also work for East Sussex County Council, and I'm one of the youth workers that runs the Youth Cabinet. So my whole job is really about involving children, young people, helping them to have influence and make sort of informed decision makers that are making decisions about young people's lives. So everyone this morning has spoken a little bit about children and young people. I am concerned that that's underrepresented. I'm concerned because we are hearing so many problems that young people are facing. We're hearing about barriers to access. We're hearing about health inequalities that are exacerbated among children and young people. So I have two questions really, and this is for all three of you. So how will young people benefit from the new integrated care structure? And Stephen, you also mentioned having a diverse board. So because young people and age is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act, how will young people's voices feed into that integrated care board so that it is truly diverse?
Okay, one for you. And
yeah, I think you make a really good point there, actually, because I think there is not a board member who is probably less than 30, if I'm honest, probably even less than 40. So I think we need to think about how we do get the voice there. So I think our Director of Children's Services was a deliberate choice to ensure that at least the sector is represented, but that in itself isn't enough. I think it's fair to say. I think I'd like to see that when we look at through the individual place-based partnerships, there should be a voice of children, particularly at that level as well. So I think we need, it's a case of how we make sure that the voice of children is heard, and young people, at every level of the system, not just at one. So that doesn't completely answer your question, but it's not completely lost either.
Can we expect someone under 25 on your board?
Not by Friday, no.
Well, I'll give you till Saturday. But there we go. A question that also a delayed question from the first session. Oh, sorry, Louise. Yeah.
Thank you. Is this working? Yeah, right. Thanks so much. And it's so brilliant that there is a Young Health Watch. There isn't one everywhere, so fantastic for Sussex. And we've got a real problem, haven't we, in Sussex, particularly in West, but actually across the patch, particularly about mental health and young people. I know almost everybody's referred to that today. And the part of the key to improving that is the involvement of the voice of young people and children. Because, and actually, I don't know if people have seen the Foundations for Our Future plan.
Yeah, I co-chaired the oversight board.
You co-chaired the oversight board. And I think that's the point, because actually having a plan that is co-designed with young people, and so wonderful that it's from a Health Watch point of view as well, again, I keep banging on about it, is the key to service improvement. So thank you, Ed.
Can we go live back to the the parked position in the lay-by with Becky?
I think. Thank you. I think there are two things, and hi Ed, it's nice to see you. One is that I think that we have both in East and West Sussex got really strong participation structures for youngsters, and I'm really keen that we plug into those rather than trying to create something separate over the top of it. The thing that always makes me cringe is when people want to bring young people into council ways of working rather than us going out to them. And you and I have enjoyed some good Sunday lunches, haven't we, down there to various of the youth clubs to talk about the budget. So I think it is really important that we use, that we're not asking young people to keep saying over and over again the same things, and that particularly through the structure of the youth cabinet, through the Children in Care Council, and those other structures that we've got, that we make sure we get the voices in. But the other thing I wanted to say, and I think that Children's is a really, really good example of how the ICS is going to work brilliantly, because yes, children will be represented in the and their interests and their services at the 3 place partnerships, but also at the Sussex level as well. And we've never had that before. Always Children's, and because of the demography of Sussex, it's interesting that you talk about children being underrepresented. I think the risk is that they're represented in the discussions proportionately to their part of the population. So we need to really boost that voice up. And I think that being able to do it in both of those places, I hope will be really significant. And I know, and I'm sorry I've missed the discussions, but I think there is almost nothing more urgent than the healthcare, than the mental health issues in relation to youngsters. And whilst everyone's will, I'm sure, be familiar with some of the things that have happened in West Sussex, it's not just about West Sussex, and it's not just about 2 towns in West Sussex. What we're seeing through education and the catch-up work with schools, that there has been a really profound impact. Not on all, because it's really important to say some children have absolutely thrived during the pandemic. There's no doubt about it. But for an awful lot of children, it has really blighted their development, whether that's education, social, emotional, in a way that we need as a nation to do something about.
Louise, you wanted to come back in?
Yes, thank you for giving me another shot at this as well, Geoffrey. Just want to say that in a previous life, I worked with the World Health Organization on a big report which for a campaign to stop ageism. And ageism goes both ways. And I do worry sometimes that the narrative about, so young people are incredibly important. So are middle-aged people, and so are older people. And actually, the fact that we're living longer is a wonderful thing. Now, there are a lot of, the population is aging across Sussex, and that may lead to more healthcare costs and social care cost. But it's really good that people are living for longer. Let's not ever create any kind of sort of phony war between the generations, because everybody is important at whatever age.
And I'm always struck by the creative ways that Young Health Watch in Brighton and Hove goes about their business. They really know how to get to their demographic in some very creative ways. Now, you've been terribly patient over there. Say who you are and what's your question?
Sorry, I think it fits better in this slot anyway. I'm Catherine, and for a couple of years, I've been using my lived experience, both as a service user and a carer and someone bereaved by suicide. And then recently took up a post that was commissioned by the Community Transformation Programme. I work for Capital Project, but the position is to be independent, and I have a year to set up a network of the networks that are of the places that are creating lived experience networks. So I'm trying to, touch in with everybody and so on. And I've already been in touch with the Sussex Health and Care Partnership and some other ICS meetings. And I can see that the assembly, I think, is going to be something that I'm going to try very hard to make sure I have a link with. What I have found, I've worked locally and nationally, and I've found that Sussex has a really good model around lived experience quite well, and also about putting the voice of lived experience at the heart of just about everything it does. But I have been at meetings with commissioners in particular, where when I say, where have you budgeted for the lived experience to start coming in on this? It's sort of, once everything's up and running, we'll do a few surveys and see if that works, rather than right at the beginning. And I'm wondering if you have lived experience represented in the board, or at least as people who will consult in with decisions that are being made.
Okay, I guess that's for you, Stephen, first, and then I'll bring in Louise, because we know the makeup of a lot of health watches does have people with lived experience.
Yeah. I think we have a number of lived experiences within our board, to be fair. And I think actually we've got an accountant with a heart who's got a family with learning disabilities, and even counts himself as partially neurodiverse. So just as one small example around that. But I think actually we can't just rely on tokenism, and so it's important that we continue to engage. So I don't think it's just about the board, it's about the way we engage communities. And as I said earlier, Becky couldn't hear that, but I think we can't do this alone. We should be doing that in conjunction with our local authorities. We should be doing it in conjunction with voluntary sector organisations and health watchers, as we talked about earlier.
Can I just, before Louise comes in, can our lay-by correspondent comment? I don't know whether you've got something to comment on that question, Becky. I think we may have her partially frozen for the moment. So let's go to Louise while Will sorts out the technology.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really good question. And when I think about health watch, hello.
Whoops.
I think I mentioned it when in my speech earlier. Is that I think it's kind of one of the USPs of local health watch, to actually make sure that they are involving people with lived experience and making sure that not only do they kind of open the door to people with lived experience, they kind of jam it open and ensure that those people are able to bring their views forward. And a lot of local health watch I speak to say, well, we're not representative, but we will make sure that people from those communities do get heard. So I think from people experiencing homelessness to, to refugees, to such a huge range of groups. And I kind of hate, inclusion groups. I hate terms like that because it's just people, they're people. And local health watch are thinking all the time, as are other people in the voluntary community sector, who we're not hearing, who we're not listening to, and how can we get their words and their needs and their wants and their feelings through to the people who've got power. So that's one of the reasons why I absolutely love working for Health Watch.
I fear we may have lost the connection for the moment with our lay-by correspondent, but hopefully we will get that back. If you will, just pull this piece of string tighter between the two tins. It always works for me. I mean, when I was working and I set up the comms for National Institute for Care and Care Quality Excellence, or whatever they keep calling themselves these days, we set up something called a Citizens Council, which was a demographic that represented people across the spectrum. And it kind of informed the people who made decisions about which treatments and technologies were going to be available on the NHS. And it gave a sort of a public dimension to that decision-making. It's a model that's worked, but who knows? You've got plenty on your plate. Can we have any other questions? Yes, we've got one here. So sorry, you had one earlier, I know.
Hold it. Do you want me to?
No need to stand up.
This is weird. Okay, so I'm Amy Broadbent and I'm co-chair for Young Health Watch in East Sussex. And I just firstly had a question for you guys about how we need to, we already know that there are many services in Sussex which are community sector, which are providing kind of almost what would be classed as a traditionally in mental health services, like a tier 2 kind of program. But what I found is they're not really recognised by health services, so they're not signposted correctly. So I just wanted to ask you, are you willing to put in the funding so services like NHS 111 can go share? Like I know, for example, South Down in East Sussex, they provide a crisis service for young people who aren't in active suicide and suicidal harm, but they're still experiencing those thoughts. So, but where it'd be a much better place for them to go instead of A&E, where it's 6 hours, then a referral to the children's ward, and then stay there for another few days for what is clinically unnecessary. So yeah, are you just willing to put in the funding to signpost people like clinicians on NHS 111, CAM services to be educated about those different sectors, which would be a plan B almost to waiting lists, because I think it can be transferred to all of healthcare in general.
Okay, as predicted, a lot of questions about funding.
Yeah.
Stephen?
I completely agree with you. I think, Amy, I don't think it's just an issue for young people. I think the population at large do not know how to navigate our NHS, and I think we've done a really bad job at helping to signpost everybody. And so I think actually one of the real opportunities we've got is to try to we have to find many different communication mechanisms. It can't just be online because of the people who aren't digitally included as well. But I think each community, we need to say, this is where you need to go for this service, this for this service, this for this service. Because I think you think about what role can pharmacies play? What role can actually voluntary sector organisations play? What role do GP surgeries play? You know, the reason we've got long wait to A&E is people don't know where else to go. And that's why people are waiting a long time, because there's a lot of people in A&E that, frankly, there's a better place for them to be served. So, yeah, a young person with a suicidal thoughts, the last place on earth you should go to is A&E, because actually that's really not a calm, safe environment. And actually, you know, the teams in the A&E departments do their very best, and we do have some protected rooms, but you know, you just need 2 patients of that with that particular sort of condition at the same time. Then where do they both go? You know, so and that's a very real challenge for some of our acute services. So I think we've got a really big communication job to do in terms of helping people to navigate our really complex system. And because we've now got NHS Sussex over the top of all of it, we've now got someone who can take responsibility for doing it, rather than saying each individual trust has got to try to explain what they understand the system is. So it won't necessarily be done on Friday, but I think I see the communication is vitally, vitally important.
Thank you for that question. It looks like we've got Becky back from our lay-by correspondent, but you're on mute, my darling.
I'm sorry about the glitching. I'm sorry because I'm about to answer a question which I didn't really hear, but I'm just going to pick up from what Stephen said, the kind of nature of it. The thing I would say is that with the arrival of Jane Padmore as the new chief exec at SPFT, I mean, her professional background is CAMS, and I would say that the spirit of joint work is the best it's ever been between West and East Sussex and SPFT. We need to turn that into practical, but I think, and I won't because it's not fair on the individuals, but I can point to a number of children who were in a very, very difficult situation, who I am clear that the service they've received from us jointly is much better than it was, you know, if you go back a bit. So we are absolutely sort of focused on it, both at a place level and also at the ICS level. And I think that my sense is that SPFT are absolutely committed to coming out and joining us in the community work. That's not that they've not done it before, but with a determination and a creativity that perhaps we haven't seen before. So I hope that that will lead to some rapid improvements.
And can we just go back to, I don't know whether your line went out before we had the question about people with lived experience on the boards of the new entity. Did you hear that question?
No, I didn't, I'm afraid.
Well, scoot back. It's part of your fitness regime, Michelle. Just if I can just ask my delegate to restate that question.
Hi, Becky, sorry. So I've been using my lived experience for a couple of years and recently moved into a position funded by the Community Transformation Fund to pull together the networks of lived experience that's being utilised already. The remit and so on, I've got a year to identify exactly what this role is going to do and then try to get that network in place and sustainable and get voices of lived experience in as many places as possible. I had asked about, particularly when I've had commissioners in meetings when they're talking about potential commissioning and tendering of services, that when I ask the question about when they budgeted for lived experience, it's not really been considered. And I mean, that's true throughout you know, it's not just the commissioners, but I've particularly noticed it in those instances. I'm just going to cheekily add a bit in. I am aware that people have their lived experience when they're on the board and things like that, but there are specifics that they won't have lived experience of. So for example, there's a commission for tender at the minute for mental health crisis houses to be set up in West Sussex. And none of the commissioners in that group had thought that lived experience would be used. It felt like anywhere in that project. They didn't realise, and thankfully they're going to revisit the budget now because of my question. But yeah, it was just to try and ensure that lived experience does start from the top down rather than and meet those of us working from the bottom up.
Okay, I don't know whether you want to come back on that, Becky.
So I mean, what I would say is that it is really fundamental to make sure that we are putting the needs, the aspirations, the experiences, the lived experience of people who we're designing services for at the heart of it. You know, sometimes that's about making sure there's a budget to pay to make sure that we're getting that. An awful lot of it is also in the way that we work. I've chaired a number of boards, and I've seen it done really well. So I have got people that have got lived experience on it. I've seen it done really well, and I've seen it done really badly. So I think we just need to make sure that we're doing it in a thoughtful way. I think it's a really good and it's an important challenge, and one I hope that we step up to.
Okay, let me bring Louise, because I guess health watchers across the country do come in and they speak for patients and service users, and sometimes they feed back to those who have the purse strings unpleasant truths. Do you think those people are more likely now under these new arrangements to listen and actually think before they start implementing policies?
I hope so. I mean, I think there's several themes emerging, aren't there? I mean, one is the importance of the voluntary sector in the new arrangements. One is the importance of really strong communications. And then the individuals who have spoken today, including Amy and Sarah, you tell me, and Ed, but it feels like what you're saying is landing. I mean, I hope it is, because that's our ongoing job, right? But you've made points, and then you've said, actually, it does seem like the system has listened. I think it's still extremely patchy, and sometimes it depends on individual commissioners. So the culture change needs to happen in health bodies and in the commissioning system generally. But I get the sense that when people are advocating from Healthwatch and other organisations, it is landing a bit more. I mean, I hope that is true. It'd be interesting to see what the kind of temperature in the room on that is. I mean, the job is to make it always land, obviously. Every time a point is raised, it's listened to properly. And then there's a feedback loop to say, we listened, and this is what we changed as a result of what you said.
Let me, I don't see hands shooting up yet. So, oh yes, I do another one. But while we come back, and Lucy, Becky wants to come back on that. So before
there were two things I just wanted to reflect on, one of which is I think it's really important that we recognise that there are really tough choices to be made. And I think what the new system will enable us to do is to have a wider view and to understand better the choices that we're making across health and social care. But I think in terms of being clear, we are going to have to continue to make really difficult choices. And I think the point is that even if we can't work out what the best thing to do is, working out what the least worst thing to do is sometimes the best that we can get to. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic about it, but my job is to be realistically ambitious. And that's what I am, and that's what I'll do. And I think just understanding that it's not going to be a matter of everything that everything that gets raised will immediately be implemented. And the second thing is, I do think that Healthwatch can be done really well and Healthwatch can be done really badly. It's like everything in this world. There are sort of variations of it. So there is something about the way that the challenges are raised have got to be credible and evidence-based and timely, as well as just being raised. And I'm sorry if that's a kind of a hard thing to say, but I do think it's really important. And we just need to strive. I mean, I'm really pleased to also be a trustee of the Lloyds Bank Foundation, and the reason that I do that is that that is really specifically focused on helping small voluntary sector organisations to thrive and to be the best that they can be. So I know that being in the voluntary sector is not good enough. Just like being a council doesn't mean that you're necessarily good or bad. There's a huge variation, and I think there's something about us just sort of recognising that. So it's about doing it well and doing the challenge well as it being responded to well.
I recently interviewed a pretty well-known health and social care commentator, former first wave chair of an NHS trust, a guy called Roy Lilly, and he refers to the current post holder, Secretary of State for Health, as number 19, because that's how many health secretaries he's seen in his career in the health world. Actually, it's the same number that I've seen as well. I just wonder, to all of you, health and social care is huge political football. Today, we're sort of on the eve of something new happening. And we have an election. We have politicians who are governed by the election cycle and popularity polls. How confident are you that the new arrangements will survive another Secretary of State? And Secretary of States last for about 2 years, if they're really lucky. So Louise first.
Oh, cool. I mean, I run a totally apolitical,
of course you are,
arm's length body organisation.
I shall ask our civil servants soon, don't worry.
Health Watch England. And actually, I mean, I've got an opinion about Secretaries of State. This one, I actually think, with his speech, the 4 Ps, of which patients and the public and personalising care were in that speech, and we've had the chance to talk to his officials, and I've met him a couple of times to talk through what that means in practice. And whilst we've got his ear, and some will, as long as he's there, we will keep pushing for that commitment to be turned into a reality.
Arise, Dame Louise. Now, I expect much more circumspect responses from the public servants. So, Stephen.
You see, I think it's very easy to be negative and just assume it's all going to change. As I said earlier, I actually think one of the reasons that this is different, it's the current legislation is an extension of what we'd already started to do. So actually, it was the legislation catching up, and the Department of Health and Social Care catching up with what was already happening on the ground in different ways in different parts of the country. And so I think actually our real mission is to deliver and get on with the job that we've been given, and not to worry about the politics that will happen above us, because actually our population is what matters, not who the Secretary of State is. I'm really not interested, frankly.
Becky, arise, Sir Stephen.
Or not.
So I think 2 things. I agree with Stephen, and I think if what he's saying is we know what people in Sussex need, so we'll proceed till apprehended. That's what we do at our very best. Let's not wait for permission. Let's seek forgiveness if we need it. And secondly is that if you think the health ministers are fast and furious, you want to see the housing ministers, which I think are double the number of housing ministers that there have been health ministers. I think politicians in those national roles will come and go, and it's about having that really strong evidence base and a good set of local partnerships.
Good answer. I can hear damehoods and knighthoods all around. Now, who else has a question from the floor? Because you're all remarkably quiet. Oh yes, we've got a question over here. Your fitness regime, we'll come back to you. I can't hog it. That's my job. Over there. I've been told off again, yes. 5 minutes, apparently. I am keeping a watch on the clock. Right, so say who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Nora Mazawi, and I work at Wellsbourne Healthcare as one of the social care practitioners there. And basically, social care practitioner, what we do is basically social prescribing plus. So we work with patients, but also with the whole family. And I just wanted to go back to one of the comments that Stephen made about navigating the system, which is really difficult. And we find that, so my colleague Mel, we find that all the time that people struggle. But it's not just that, it's when we navigate the system and we, for instance, refer someone, then there's a long waiting list, or they promise them that they will ring them. And then when I then go back to the patient and say, has anyone contacted you yet? No, no one has rang me. So there is, there's that managing of expectations that I haven't heard yet about managing expectations, because it's all nice and well to refer people to the various different, if you've got that problems, you go to Money Advice, you go there, you go there. But actually, then there's a longer wait and people are getting frustrated and their health is being affected. And it's, that's a challenge on the ground. And whether it's because those services are not funded well, or they work, over capacity, like so many of us, there's just an issue at the moment. And that's why I do think funding and commissioning is really important, that if you work together with the community voluntary sector, that they are seen as proper partners and not as just okay, let's just get them to do this job, because we feel sometimes like that. We think, oh, because the doctors or whoever can't deal with it, so they just shove it to us. And it feels a little bit like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. A lot of, sorry, and I'm just going to stop because I get really cynical about things. So yeah, I just wanted to say that is an issue. So when the decisions are being made, to also take into account that just by saying, oh, we'll fund you again for doing this great work, that it also needs to be adequate, so that if we do refer people, that they don't have to wait for weeks on end. And I do appreciate, that there's more and more people needing support with all the issues that you've mentioned in the beginning as well, the finance and this, that, the other. So yeah, just wanted for everyone to just keep that in mind as well, because we're bearing that.
I think you've made your point very eloquently. I would just remind everyone, this whole session has been recorded and will be available through every channel possible. So your question, I don't expect Stephen and Louise and Becky to, okay.
I will just quickly comment. As Jeffrey said in my introduction, I was a non-executive director at the board of Sussex Community NHS Foundation Trust. And we used to regularly look at complaints as a board. And the most complaints were related to communication. So the point is not lost on me. Navigating the system might sound like a grand title, but it is about actually helping people to where to get access, but it's to keep the communication going. And with these long waiting lists, we've got to have two-way communication, not just wait for the fax to finally be sent from the NHS or the letter. Let's think about multiple ways of keeping people informed of what's happening with their treatment.
Yeah, just very briefly, because I think it's absolutely central to the point of what Healthwatch and the voluntary sector here constantly is, if we were communicated with better by the NHS and social care, then we might accept that we're going to have to, wait a bit longer, or treatment is going to be different. And actually, it needn't cost more to communicate better. And for people to, if you say you're going to ring somebody in a couple of days, that telephone call happens. Yeah. And it's this immense frustration that leads to some of the frustration and annoyance with the NHS, not necessarily with the care and treatment when people get it. So that's something at a really basic bread and butter level that the NHS needs to get right.
Okay, Becky, I'm going to bring, Becky gives new meaning to remote working. Do you want to comment on that very pertinent comment and question?
I think being clear with people about what they can expect, and if we say that we'll get in touch with people, that we do, is absolutely fundamental. And I think that's about having good systems and processes and being held to account by them. I have a personal passion about complaints, because I think if people have got to the stage where they've they feel so strong that they've actually made a complaint that, you know, it's absolutely essential that we respond to it well, but also go further, sort of back up the system and make sure that we understand and do the learning from the complaints that exist. I think the thing that really I find frustrating is when we're not gathering up that kind of experience that people are having and putting it to good use.
Thank you so much, Becky, from your remote existence on the lay-by on the way to Betty's tea rooms in Harrogate.
Indeed. I hope so. I feel like I know him.
It only suffices me to, leaves me to say thank you to our three wonderful speakers, especially to Becky, who's now thinking about Becky's scones and jam and not the LGA conference. Louise, you're staying with us?
Yes.
Stephen too?
Yep.
So can we show our appreciation in the usual way, please?